Hey everyone, welcome back to Anvil of Doom Miniatures. My name is Deets, and what a huge week it's been for fans of the Eldar and the Old World. After years of waiting, the Eldar finally has a bit of a refresh on their range, and it was pretty impressive. It may be the inner elf simp in me, but I love the Eldar. I actually own a more recent range of Eldar miniatures, which I eventually want to get around to painting, but I always struggle with trying to choose which craft world to go with. I was leaning towards Bill 10, but eventually I decided to go with the bad boys and girls of Ulthwé. There's something about the black and bone color scheme which is very tricky, and you know me, I like to always take the hard road with painting miniatures, so it was probably the perfect fit. A few months ago I was gifted this amazing Eldar War Walker from one of my Patreons and a massive friend of the channel, Viking Fire Project, and he also sent me some weird Canadian treats. The maple syrup was really good though, so what I've decided to do is kind of do a test scheme on this Eldar War Walker and then maybe apply it to the rest of my miniatures. But before we get into it, I have some channel news later on in the video, so make sure you stick around for that, but let's get cracking. This kit was in a bit of a state when I first got my greasy mitts on it. There was mold lines, multiple layers of old paint which was really hard to get off, and also it was glued together with epoxy and it was really hard to disassemble. But lucky for me, I got some advice from a good friend and he told me to throw it in the freezer for a few hours to make the epoxy brittle, and you wouldn't believe it, but it worked and it came apart super easily. I unfortunately didn't get any footage of this, but if you're having trouble disassembling a mini that was heavily epoxied together, try throwing it in the freezer. I'm going to get some pinning done first up and get this out of the way, and I often get asked how I set my minis up to be painted in a sub-assembled form, and it's fairly simple. I use some old containers as my handles, I slap down some blue tack, then coil up some wire, slap on some more blue tack to make it a bit more stable, and then I make sure my wire is pointing up, and I use a tiny bit of super glue and place the part on where I drill my hole. I always make sure I drill a hole with a good depth so it's nice and secure when it's on the wire. Let's get some paint on this dandy long-legged thing, and when I'm painting black, I like to quickly go back over with a base coat of Abaddon black, as I like the finish of Abaddon black much more than the Chaos black undercoat. As I want this model to be predominantly black, just like all good Ulthwé minis are, I'm going to use some glazing to get a subtle transition of light hitting the armor panels. I want the ends of the panels to be highlighted, but the middles to stay pure black. So today I'm going to really take my time and slowly glaze on Dark Reaper and Abaddon Black towards the ends of the panels, and as I mix in more Dark Reaper to my glaze, I'm covering less of an area. Glazing can be tricky, but it's definitely a skill worth having in your arsenal. The key is to have the right amount of paint on the brush, and I sometimes quickly dab my brush onto some paper towel to get rid of the excess water. Usually for my black recipe I use some cold bluish greys, but as this is a space elf I want a neon effect, so I'm going to mix in some Baharoth blue as it's pretty punchy. I find a great way to come up with new painting methods or recipes for your minis is by looking at the huge amount of classic Warhammer art that's out there and having my paints in front of me to try and colour match. This classic 3rd edition codex cover really inspired my colour scheme for this mini, and over the past week or so I've had it up on my screen as a painting reference and for some inspiration. As I was painting the black panels, I realised that it was going to be much easier to leave the Walker pilot's black armour until after I painted the seat cushions, as they were in a really tricky spot. I thought a dark leather couch look would be pretty fun because I want this guy to be in a complete state of comfort while he's out there dropping those genetically modified guys who have daddy issues, or as we like to call them, Space Marines. Once the leather was all wrapped up, I went back over his tiny little armor panels with the same recipe I used for the panels, and I'm not going to lie, this was pretty tricky due to the scale and the pose that he was in. As I said earlier, I'm going to incorporate some of the Ulthwé bone color scheme to this guy, and part of me wishes that I used a Wraithbone Prime on some of the parts instead of using the black, because it was a bit of a nightmare painting the Wraithbone over the top of this black. It took me around 3 to 4 coats to make sure no black was coming through, but later on I did notice some spots I missed, and this was a little bit annoying, but not the end of the world. Sometimes when I'm painting my minis, I don't have it all planned out, and originally I was going to paint the frame of the seat black or yellow, but while I was throwing on the Wraithbone layer, I thought it would look pretty cool in bone. Changing your mind while painting minis is all a part of the fun, and being fluid with your choices can sometimes work out for the best. I find the projects that I go into really blind about what I'm going to do generally catch the eye a bit more. Like always with my bone recipe, I'm making a wash with some contrast medium and a small amount of skeleton horde. Yes, I do use a fair bit of contrast medium for my miniatures, but using this for some of your washes instead of water will have a way better finish, and that's the Anvil of Doom guarantee. After a couple coats of the wash, I got to work highlighting the larger raised surfaces with some Vallejo bone white, and Eldar minis are a bit tricky as there are a lot of smooth surfaces to tackle, and this means that if your paint consistency is too thick, you'll see a lot of paint marks, which is a little bit annoying and makes Eldar minis a bit daunting to tackle. After the bone white was applied, I whipped out a new paint for the final highlight, and that is AK Paint's Ivory. It is a bit brighter than the bone, but if you don't have this, you can always mix in a small amount of white to your bone white. This should work fine. I picked up a few new AK paints from PAX Australia this year, and I've got to say they're pretty great paints and they cover well, especially the 3rd generation paints. I'm going to eventually splurge and get some more and maybe do a video purely with AK paints in the future as a bit of a test. Let me know down in the comments below if that's something you'd like to see. Okay, so things are looking pretty good so far, and it's time for that channel announcement, and the announcement is that I finally have more merch back up on the Anvil of Doom web store. I have 3 new prints and 2 new sticker packs up on the store, and once it's sold out, so you're gonna have to be quick. All of this merch was hand drawn and designed by myself, so if you want to support the channel, head on over to my web store. The link should be down here somewhere, and the link is also in my bio, and go pick up your official Anvil of Doom merchandise today. I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, back to the video. On the box art, this guy has some yellow, and I noticed back in the day that the Ulthwé scheme was yellow and black, so I decided to add some yellow to the wing-like panels and also the helmet. Now, as I was applying my yellows, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great to put some freehands on this guy? This miniature has a lot of surface area, and freehands wouldn't be too tricky on it, so I sucked it up and got out my skinny brush. Now, doing freehands takes practice. There's no real secret to it. You just need to give it a go and hope for the best. I like to start off painting with my darkest color first, and then I'll build up my highlights later on. For my lines, I'm kind of pinching the brush and letting my fingers do all the work, just as I would if I were drawing on a bit of paper. Once the initial outline of the flames is done, I'll then color in the rest. This is the part where you can fix up any small mistakes using black or adjust the size of the flames. For the other leg, I'm going to use the box art as reference and slap on an Ulthwé symbol on the lower part of the leg and the other heavy weapon symbol above it. I'm putting down skinny lines first and slowly and carefully building up the line's thickness until I'm happy. You can see I'm making a kind of back and forth motion with my brush, and I'm doing this as a way to line up where I want the paint to sit on the mini. If I just slapped it on, I probably wouldn't get the paint exactly where I want it. Again, when you're attempting freehands, just take your time. There is no need to rush. Once I was happy with how the bronze flesh tone layers were looking, I decided to start my highlights, and just as I did for the black panels, I relied heavily on glazing my brighter yellows to the edges of the flames, helmet, symbols, and the panels. I don't want the flames to look realistic. I want them to look like a decal you would have got on your old Ford Festiva after handing over the keys to exhibit back in the early 2000s. I've seen a few great mini artists out there do some amazing freehand works over the past few years, and it's a goal of mine to push myself to become a better painter that doesn't really need to rely on decals when I don't need them. In saying this, there isn't anything wrong with decals. They're great for tackling large amounts of units, but if I have the opportunity not to use them, I'll take it just to try and improve my brush control. I do find that yellow is a pretty forgiving color when glazing, and next time I think I might sprinkle in some orange to the mix to give it a larger amount of saturation. I spent about 4 or 5 hours getting these yellows right, and if this didn't give me arthritis, I don't know what will. My hands were pretty sore after this endeavor. And just when you thought the freehanding was over, it wasn't. I did a little symbol on the elf's helmet and a couple on the gun panels with some Abaddon black. If you follow the channel for a while, you notice that I don't paint that much 40k, as I definitely think that there are enough channels out there tackling the subject. But I do love 40k miniatures, and eventually I do want to paint up some more for the channel. I really only paint minis that inspire me, give me a hit of nostalgia, or minis that I think are kind of funny. And if what's trending in the hobby is something I'm not really interested in or bored of, or if it's something that doesn't appeal to me, I won't really get into it. I've decided over the past month that this channel isn't really about chasing the popular thing to do for the sake of likes and channel growth. It's more about appreciating the hobby and painting things that I love, or showing you guys minis that you may have forgotten about. On the last video, I painted up an ogre mini that has always excited me, as it stands out from the pack because it has a ninja-like look, which isn't that common in the world of Warhammer. And I guess that's what this channel is really about. YouTube wasn't around when these minis were made, and I don't want these old kooky relics to be forgotten about. Okay, they aren't as sleek and as modern as newer miniatures, but boy oh boy do they have character. And if you have them sitting away in a cupboard, I want to try and inspire you guys to dust them off and get some paint on them. Anyway, that's my little rant over. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. There are plenty more fun things I have in the pipeline, and I really hope you're enjoying the channel. And to finish off this little space elf fella, it's time to do his eye lenses. Now, painting eye lenses is really fun for me because I don't really get the opportunity to do many of them because I paint predominantly old world, but this was a real treat as I love painting kind of special effects and things that glow. So the spacefaring elf and his baby carrier are all finished and painted, and it's time to kind of glue it together, and this was a bit of a nightmare. I kind of had to build some scaffolding around it and kind of glue it together, but I accidentally knocked it over at one point. I don't know how. I kind of bumped the table a little bit and it all just came crashing down, and then I couldn't really glue parts back in, so it was a little bit of a mess, and it did come out a little bit lopsided, but you know, These things happen with metal miniatures, it's just a part of the game. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. But anyway, here it is. Here's one classic Eldar War Walker. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end of the video, guys. I really appreciate it. And another massive thank you to Viking Fire Project for sending me this miniature. I really appreciate it, mate. And also a massive thank you to all of my Patreons as well. I wouldn't be able to make videos like this without you guys. If you want to join the Anvil of Doom Patreon, the link is in the bio. And don't forget that the Anvil of Doom merch is now back up in the store, so head on over there to get yourself a sweet little treat. Anyway, guys, I'm out of here. I'll see you all next time. Cheers.